Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Lighthouse Sessions. I'm excited. Sarah and I have been talking for quite a while, and I'm excited to have her on the show today. So, Sarah, welcome to the show. Tell my audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here with yourself and your audience. I am currently a holistic health coach, but I didn't always used to be that. For 20 years, I was a registered nurse until I had my beliefs challenged. I did some research, I changed them, and realized that actually we are a powerhouse in and of ourselves, and that we have so much ability that we don't even know about. So that helped me to transition into leaving the Western medicine medical model into helping people to see the root cause of their symptoms and help themselves.
I love that. So, first of all, let's talk about the fun moment. What was the pivotal challenge that made you say, okay, I got to do something different because the old way isn't working?
It started with internal conflict, because once I'd started tweaking my diet and lifestyle, wondering if I was as special as everybody I was reading on the internet who were healing themselves, is it possible for me? Once I started seeing tangible results in my own body, I then started becoming a little conflicted, because at home I was living a more natural, healthier lifestyle. And then at work in the hospital as a nurse, I was dishing out medications, helping people post-operatively, following surgery, and following doctor's orders. So that conflict spiraled into a deep, dark depression with suicidal thoughts. And I had no idea how I would heal. I just knew I would, because I'd healed so much up to that point.
Yeah.
And that really, coming out of that depression, I was in it for about 3 years, because I didn't understand the power of coaches, and all my doctor wanted to do was give me medicines. So as I started coming out of that, I realized that actually was my pivotal moment, that something needed to change in my life. But I didn't see it until I was stepping out of it and away from that deep, dark abyss.
I love that. And I think that's the really amazing thing, that most fantastic growth happens in that moment of darkness. It's almost the cost of admission. You got to go through the dark to get to the other side. So
absolutely. And as the saying goes, something like, you learn more from the bottom of a mountain or in the valley than you ever will at the top.
well, the funny thing about people like us, the visionary entrepreneurs, we think it's all straight to the top. And what we don't realize is you climb the mountain a bit, and then there's a valley, and then it's like our focus goes, and all we see is the valley and the darkness. And it's just a reminder to look up. So let's talk about your book. And I believe the original title was Heal Yourself. Sorry, I'm looking at a French, and I don't know the other language, but
so yes, the original version was in English, and then I had it translated into Spanish, French, and Dutch.
Dutch is what I'm seeing then.
Right.
So what was the origin of that book? How did you go from being a Western trained nurse? You were a nurse in the UK. How did you learn how to heal yourself? And now how are you applying that to your people?
So I learned from, well, first of all, I was challenged. We moved to America forever. That forever lasted 2 years. But whilst we were there, I was challenged by a nurse colleague. So that set me off on research. And that research helped me to start tweaking my diet and lifestyle. And in doing so, I started healing psoriasis, eczema, acid reflux, candida, chronic pain. And as I started healing, I was looking more and more at how else can I heal. It was when I went into that deep, dark depression. I also, my thyroid stopped working, became very slow. I burned out my adrenal glands with all the stress I was going through. I realized I had chronic PTSD because I would have a visceral reaction. I would literally vibrate when there was conflict and loud voices and anger and frustration. And I healed all that myself. But for the first 41 years, until my beliefs were challenged in that hospital in America, I only knew doctors and medicines and hospitals. So once I changed my beliefs and come to actually my body heals me when I support it, I thought there must be more people like me out there that have gone through a number of years believing that there's only doctors and medicines and hospitals.
Yeah.
So I'll just call her a friend with gifts. Told me I would write a book when I was in that deep, dark, depressive state. I'm like, I'm trying not to kill myself. Why on earth would I write a book? What would I write a book about? I am not an author. Anyway, as I stepped out of that deep depression, I thought there's got to be more people like me who have no idea that this is even possible. So I started writing my book about everything that I'd healed to that point. And then this little voice on my shoulder said, who do you think you are? You're not an author. Nobody wants to read what you're writing. So I closed it on my laptop for 5 years because who was I? There was an authenticity thing. You know, I'd only ever wanted to be a nurse. And now here I am thinking that nursing is actually killing me. I need to step away. So one day I woke up and a voice inside my head said, you've got to invite more people. You've got to reach out on the internet. There's more people like you doing a whole range of healing. So I did. And lots of people came back to me. I had a deadline for publishing because I was entering a Hay House competition. And up to that deadline, 74 people got back to me with their healing, things like ALS or motor neurone, as we call it in the UK, multiple sclerosis, Lyme, cancer, stroke, autoimmune, asthma, allergies, sensitivity, so many health problems. I mean, it blew my mind because I'm only, in air quotes, healing my thyroid and my adrenals and depression. I'm like, look what these people are doing.
Yeah.
So
it's funny how even with miracles, we judge quantity over quality.
I know, right? But it was mind-boggling to think all these years, I'd spent 41 years believing there was only doctors and pills. And now I've changed my belief. And all these people are, you know, because my sphere is like widening, but now they're healing things that doctors told us would kill us.
Yeah.
And it was just fantastic to read all these beautiful souls and their healing. So that's how my book was born.
I love it. And I'm going to paraphrase Napoleon Hill because 100 years ago, more or less, he said, what the mind can conceive and believe we can achieve.
Yes.
And, you know, it was funny because when somebody told me I'm the root cause of all ill in my body and in my mind, my first reaction was, who the hell are you? You know, I was offended. Yes. And then I paused for a minute and I went, wait a minute, if that's true, I'm also able to fix all of these things. And then I got really excited. So I think that's part of it. And for the record, if we look at the medical industry, it is all about money and, you know, they need sick people. I mean, hospitals need patients. If you don't have patients, you're not a hospital. You know, if you don't have patients as a surgeon, you don't have your golf and country club membership. And, you know, there's a lot of money in illness, but very little in wellness. And I find that a fascinating, you know, and Eastern medicine tends to focus more on wellness, whereas we focus on illness.
Yes. And I like Eastern medicine because it combines the mind, the body, and the soul. It's really is holistic, and that's why I put the word holistic in my title, because I work with the mind, the body, and the soul together. But also Western medicine separates our body and mind, our lungs and our hearts, our nerves from our bones, our muscles from our organs, and we're all like this mishmash of separate, and there's a doctor and a surgeon for every single part of us. But we're not just parts, we are the sum of the parts, which is far greater. And no one system works in isolation. Everything is interconnected. So we have to look at holistic healing. We can't just look at how can I heal my liver? It's like, well, what else impacts the liver and what does the liver impact? So we have to look at healing all of us.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating to me because I think Western medicine is almost exclusively body, whereas most bigger things start with the soul, then the mind, and then the body. And I find it fascinating because a lot of people, especially in North America, we're looking for that easy button, and if I do this, I'll get that, and we don't fix the being that is in the body. We just focus on fixing the outer shell, and none of that lasts in my world. So
No, because the Western medicine, as I say, it's only fixing one, or fixing in air quotes, we'll go with one area of the body that there's
yeah,
a problem with. But actually, when we're looking at Western medicine, it seeks to suppress a symptom.
yeah,
It's not healing it, it's stopping it, as in it's pushing it
suppressant.
back into the body. And that symptom, there's wisdom in it to help us to understand what we need to look at, to address. So if we use Western medicine to shush that symptom, our subconscious mind's going to go, oh, she's quiet in that avenue, so let's throw this because this is a bit bigger. She might listen to this. And that's how our symptoms stack up. It's easy to take a pill for, say, a headache, and a pill for an upset stomach, and a bit of cream for dry skin. But when we're pushing all those symptoms away to suppress them, the body's got to come up with different ways of getting our attention.
Well, it's funny, and I love the term feedback because I talk about that a lot. But you go to a doctor and they say, well, let's try this and see what happens. And you suppress, you push down on one, and then something else pops up, and they're like, oh, here's another one.
Yeah. It's like whack-a-mole in there.
Yeah, it's all literally whack-a-mole. And I keep looking at it going, don't we have science? Like, haven't we sort of? But again, if you think about it, if you go to a foot doctor, they're going to solve your foot problem. They don't care that triggers a hip problem or a back problem. And we've become such specialists that I went to somebody to fix a hand problem, and then it caused a wrist problem, and I'm like, okay, could we look at the elbow next?
Yeah.
There's a really old song called Dem Bones, and I feel like we need to remind people that things are connected.
Yes, but they really are. And coming back to what you said earlier, we are the cause, but we're also the solution to our problems. And once we can accept that, because not everybody can accept that, we just win. It's just win-win.
And not to pick on surgeons, because the world needs them, but when Absolutely. The only tool you have is a scalpel, everything looks like a surgery waiting to be done.
Yes. And there is a place for Western medicine, with emergencies, trauma, accidents, absolutely need Western medicine. But for everything else, we have the symptoms before it becomes full-blown, whatever it is. And we need to come back into our body and listen to what it's trying to tell us through the whispers before it needs to scream.
Yeah. And I think that's a fascinating thing. And I will say I believe in both. And I think you have that balance too. But I see people who either go all one way. I knew somebody who had stage 4 cancer, and she went to some prayer circle and they were going to heal her, and she said no to all medicine. And then there's other people go the other way, and they say, well, I'm going to have surgery after surgery after surgery. One of the things I would say about especially healing ourselves, you got nothing to lose by trying.
Exactly. Yes.
I see it as an and, not an or. You're not going to go to your doctor and say, okay, I don't want this treatment, but there's other, maybe I try this. And it's interesting because I've met probably 3 people in the last few months, all terminal stage 4 cancer of some sort. 30 years ago, the doctor sent him home and said, go make peace and get your affairs in order. And they decided to find a way to heal themselves. And, again, a lot of it was toxic lifestyle, stress. I mean, if you think about us when we're anxious or we're depressed or we're stressed, we produce a lot of toxic chemicals that just accumulate. And
we absolutely do, yes. And there's many stories of people. My lady on my podcast today, told to go home, stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She went home, looked at her 5 young children, went, "I'm not going to die. You know, it's not happening. It's not even negotiable." And she just changed her beliefs. Yeah.
You know, it's funny. One of the biggest examples I have, you may have heard of Lester Levinson. He was an early self-healer. I think it was in the 50s or 60s. Same thing. He was burnt out, stressed out. He worked on Wall Street or something. His doctor said, "Go home and get ready to die." And he developed a technique. It's called releasing. But basically the entire premise, and he ended up he lived to a ripe old age. But it was all about, we make ourselves sick by the stories we tell ourselves about whatever is happening to us.
Yes.
And I realized that everything happens for me, and all of a sudden the stress just vanishes.
Yes, absolutely. And it's the story that we tell. I mean, the vast majority of people have come through some trauma at some point, whether that was trauma as in capital T, physical, mental, emotional, sexual abuse, whether that was trauma little t, as in being made fun of, not being recognized, not feeling loved and worthy. It's not so much the trauma that we go through, it's how we hold it as that child, because we're still holding it as that child that we were until we deal with it. So we've all got that inside of us. It's a case of looking at it and being compassionate and empathic with our inner child who's struggling. And when we feel that anxiety, that stress, that fear, it's our body's way of saying, you've got something to deal with there. You know, this emotion is showing you something's coming up to be dealt with. And quite often it's our inner child that's frightened, scared, worried, that wants some love and affection.
The irony is that a lot of us, we don't see our inner child, therefore we ignore it, which means the symptoms persist.
And a lot of people are totally oblivious about the inner child. Never heard of it before.
It's, you know, I find it fascinating because I have a friend right now who's going through a very dark place, and I've been there, so I can see what he's doing, but literally he's running away from his inner child who's just wants to express something. And what I find is when you stop and face the inner child and you let it be expressed, whatever that something is, let's go.
Absolutely. Yes, it does, because it's seen, it's heard, and it's been validated.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because Carl Jung talked about shadow work and inner work. And I'm going to be honest, I'm a really practical person. It was like, you need to do something, just do it and get on with it. But again, you keep pushing layers, you're suppressing symptoms, and at some point something bubbles up.
Yes. Whether you're doing it emotionally, subconsciously, or medically with a pharmaceutical, you're still suppressing. And as you rightly say, you can only suppress so much, and then that pot's going to blow.
And the more you suppress, the higher and bigger. And, you know, one of the things I find, and we'll come to my audience of visionary entrepreneurs, they've normalized stress, burnout, you know, all of those things. You know, it was deeply disturbing for me the day I learned I was actually human. I worked myself to exhaustion and I had adrenal burnout and I got sick. I'm like, no, this isn't me. I don't have time. And you know, I was crawling to work and I'm like, okay, this is not helping.
Yeah, and that as well can be a trauma response in the trying to control, the overachiever, the overworker. We're looking to control something within us at the same time as external validation for our worth.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing I'm seeing is there's a tie between high-performing people who are ignoring their stresses and forms of addiction. And It's funny because they don't always think of them as addiction, but I know people that go to the gym 4 hours a day, or they'll, but one way or another, we self-medicate that inner child, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, food, exercise.
Scrolling.
Yeah. I actually have one friend, I'm not kidding. He's addicted to therapy. If there's a method of therapy out there, he's taken it. And I call it therapeutic tourism because he's not actually paying attention. He's just, I'm going to try this. And he gives it a week and, that doesn't work. And
Yeah.
the thing I found interesting was he actually wanted and liked the story that I'm in therapy. Like, it was sort of his bragging rights that I'm doing all of this work, but not letting any of it soak through.
Yeah, it's his story.
Yeah.
But I must be healing because I'm doing all this therapy.
Yeah, he sees the activity.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is what I find fascinating with entrepreneurs. Some of them, they're so busy being busy. I actually worked with one, and he was working 80, 100-hour weeks. And I said, let's take away 10 hours a week. And he said, I don't know what I'd do with myself. I'm like, sleep, meditate,
Eat.
see your kids, go visit. Yeah. So I do think one of the problems is when you get on that treadmill of hustle and grind, it feels like defeat to say, I need to pause and take a breath.
Yes. And there's also a different side of that, in like that person you were just saying about. There are some people that don't want to be alone with their own thoughts. So they will find something to keep themselves busy.
Yeah. They need the noise to, and I'll share that I went through a lot of shadow work, and I realized that all of the dark thoughts and the scary thoughts, they were just little pieces of me as a child that I'd ignored. And, they felt scary to me because to my, 4-year-old, 8-year-old, whatever self, it was the very threat of existence. You're not thinking, oh, this person's mad at me and they'll forgive me tomorrow. You're thinking existential existence crisis.
Absolutely, yes, because at such a young age, you haven't got that thought process to be able to work anything else out.
Yeah, it's fascinating that a lot of it, I use terms that I would use on a dog because that keeps it simple. But if you ever say to a dog, good boy, good girl, they start wagging and their tail is going. And if you say bad dog, they just, they do that shame curl. And we do that unconsciously with ourselves.
Yes, we do. We do. And there's a lot of shame. A lot of people hold shame and guilt, which show up as pain and autoimmune and fibromyalgia. And they're not even aware that they're holding that shame and guilt until it's brought to light.
Well, the funny thing, and we'll get into how people work with you. Somebody asked me about my childhood trauma once, and I looked at them and said, I had a normal child, just like everybody else. And then they started to define trauma, and I went, oh, okay, I was in a car accident. That might be trauma.
Yeah.
But again, it's funny because a lot of, especially, if you watch the TV and media, a lot of, mental illness is very stigmatized and pathologized, whereas healing and becoming the best version of yourself is a really positive thing.
Absolutely. And I think some people are frightened to talk out about mental health because there is still stigma around it.
I actually have a friend who is a psychologist, and he said, Jeff, I know what I want to tell people because I know what works. It was kind of like you with the conflict with your nursing. He said, but the problem is if I say these things out loud, then the Psychology Association or whatever it's called sanctions him.
Wow.
And there's actually a couple of cases here of very well-known former psychologists who gave up their licensing because they were tired of being muzzled. And, it was, well, the line now is we need to encourage talk therapy. Well, what if meditation's a better route? Well, you can't bill somebody for meditation.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, Jeff, I gave up my nursing license almost 20 years to the day because for many reasons, but I mean, I'd put about my own healing on my website about my thyroid, and somebody had complained to my nursing body and they asked me to remove it from my website. I'm like, where's freedom of speech here?
Yeah. You have freedom of speech until your profession decides you don't.
Yes. And that fed into the conflict as well, because I'd only ever wanted to be a nurse, but now I can't say what I want to say to help people to help themselves because my nursing body won't allow it. Yeah. And in the end, that was one of the reasons why I surrendered my license, to be able to step away from nursing altogether into becoming a coach to help people to help themselves rather than to help them to stay in the medical system.
And, it fascinates me. I don't know if the nurses have it, but I do know doctors have the Hippocratic oath to do no harm. And it's fascinating that they abdicate and say, well, I'm not doing harm. But, again, I don't say or, it's and. What would it hurt to give your patient who's about to go into surgery a flyer or a pamphlet on meditation or breath work?
But as you rightly say, there's no money to be made in that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And, even like, I recognize there are times where surgery is completely unavoidable. But again, if you help the person heal, I actually many years ago, he was a hypnotist, and he helped people heal while reducing dependency, and especially in the opioid crisis, on pain medication.
Fabulous.
And why wouldn't we offer that?
Absolutely. I had a lady on my podcast, I think it was last year, and she'd had a major trauma, falling off a bicycle downhill and broken a back in several places and many bones. But she healed. And then I think she said her son fell over and broke his arm. And she told her son it would only take 2 weeks to heal his arm, for the break to heal. And then she spoke to doctors and nurses and said, you tell him it's going to take 2 weeks. Do not say 6. You tell him 2 weeks. And they're like, but it won't. You just tell him 2 weeks. He went back for an x-ray. Guess what? His bone had healed.
Yeah. It is a fascinating, and again, I don't need to believe all of it. I just need to believe what's possible. And I think it's fascinating. Now, you offer a 3-day free course, and I'll have the link in the notes. What is it like to work with you, and how does somebody work with you and connect with you?
Thank you, Jeff. People can work with me through a one-on-one, and I do those through video calls because my clients are global. And I've got a container that I'm building following this 3-day course, and it's called, the 3-day course is Safe to Be You. It's about coming back into yourself to recognize where your thoughts, beliefs and behaviors started from, to help you see the origins, to see if you want to still hold those beliefs. And then the 30-day container starting Valentine's Day, because it's about self-love, coming home to ourselves, is a much deeper dive and supported, and with group sessions once a week throughout that. And the work I do is I help people to recognize for themselves what's underpinning the symptoms that they're presenting with and where that's come from, so that they can see it themselves. And once they recognize the wisdom in the symptom that their body's expressing to try and get them to notice, they'll then address the area, that the root cause of their symptoms. And when we do that, the symptoms just disappear, as a secondary, like a byproduct of healing the root cause.
I think that is the key. A lot, as we've already discussed, they go for the symptoms. Don't treat my symptoms. I don't care. Yeah, okay, I might want the headache to go away, but what is the root cause? And you giving me something to make the headache go away, we've just lost the feedback to what that cause might be.
And we've taken away our own power because we've just suppressed that headache. So we're not listening to the message, the wisdom in the symptom.
Well, and that's, I think, if you think about it, the human body has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. I think it knows more than 50-year-old modern medicine, but
Yeah.
it's again, you look at Eastern medicine, and one of my other guests, he trained in Chinese and Japanese acupuncture and medicine, and it's just fascinating, the holistic approach. And I find, and I don't know what you find, but when I use the word holistic, people think hippie, woo-woo, it's sort of discarded, not appreciated and embraced.
Absolutely. Holistic puts some people off because they think it's woo. But then if we look to the Eastern medicine, is that really woo? It's grounded in science. Acupuncture came from the Chinese and the Japanese seeing where their soldiers had been wounded and what pain or symptoms they had previous to that suddenly went away following being speared or wounded by gunshot, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And that's how it's evolved. So that's thousands of years old.
Yeah. And again, it's tried, tested, proven, not, let's see what this does in the lab. So
yeah, I'll take this drug, I think it's going to help you, but if it doesn't, we've got plenty more, and then here's another drug for the side effects of the first drug. Yeah.
I personally will always give nature a chance first. So
yeah.
Now, what's something you wish people knew before they come to you? What do you wish they knew so that they come to you clear and ready to do the work? What's the biggest, oh my God, that's different. How do I change? What do they need to believe to work with you?
They need to believe that they can heal themselves.
Awesome. At the very least, they have to be open to learning that they can heal themselves.
Yes, they have to have an open mind. I was talking to a lady I've just recorded on my podcast today who came to me with diabetes type 2. And her underpinning cause was grief, loss, emotion. Whereas the doctor just says, your sugar's high, take this insulin or pills for the rest of your life. And she's like, I don't want to do that. And following our conversation, she saw when I said, is there some around grief and loss? And she's like, oh yes, I've just lost my father and my marriage is on the rocks and we're going to be splitting up. And she saw all of that grief and profound loss and then worked with it. And when we can do that and be open-minded enough to say, actually, there might be something in that because I can totally resonate with what you're saying. I can identify that in my life. When we can work with that, being open-minded enough to be able to do that, that is the root cause of the symptoms. And as I said earlier, the symptoms just melt away themselves. We don't even need to address the symptoms because we've healed the root cause.
Well, I'm thinking about, there's a book out there, I think it's called The Body Keeps Score. And
yeah,
I'm suddenly seeing the science of it, because if you think about certain dysfunction and certain blockages, we naturally store toxic chemicals in certain organs. And, I suspect when you're talking about diabetes, there's some issues in the adrenal glands and, you're holding. And worst case scenario, you let go of the trauma and maybe you don't heal. Let's just pretend that we don't heal, but you're still better off because you've let go of the trauma. Like it's it's a double win. And I'm quite frankly can't see why people wouldn't be happy with the mental win. And then if the body heals, great, that's a bonus. But to me, it just makes sense that chemically, if you're storing all these toxic chemicals in your liver, your heart, your wherever, that's going to impact your health.
Absolutely, because emotion is energy in motion.
Yeah.
And what we find is that energy stops being in motion and stagnates somewhere in the body. And then that causes us symptoms. So if we can feed that organ or that site of trapped energy and allow that energy to flow again, it's no longer trapped. So we no longer have the symptoms.
I love that. Now, where can people go to connect with you? What's the best place to learn more about what you do? And I'll, of course, include the link, but where can they find you online?
Thank you. I think the best place is just go straight to my website, which is my name, sarah.dawkins.com.
Okay, perfect. Well, Sarah, is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't that you want to leave as a final thought to my audience?
I don't think so, Jeff. We've covered a whole range of health issues, and just realistically, I think the biggest thing that causes the inflammation, which causes the health problems, because all health problems stem from inflammation. Stress, when we're feeling stressed, stress causes inflammation, which causes symptoms, dis-ease. If we can look at in our life what is causing us stress, and then look at it logically and rationally, do we have any control over that? Because most of our stress comes from out there. Yeah. And we can't do anything about that. We can only do something about ourselves. We have no control over anything external. So if stress is coming from external, can we let it go? Or can we change our perception of what's going on out there to help take the load of stress off us, so that we don't have that inflammatory response and we don't step into dis-ease?
I love that. And I think that's been a big aha for me, is that almost everything I can track all starts with stress, which leads to, the blockages and the inflammation. And when I'm good and I'm paying attention, the inflammation just magically goes away, and then everything else goes away. So
absolutely, it's as simple as that.
I love it. Well, thank you for being on the show with me, and I really appreciate your time today, Sarah.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been an honor and a blessing.